So you're getting ready for the IELTS. And you probably know the listening test can feel like a total minefield, right? Well, today we're not just going to walk through that minefield, we're going to disable its two biggest traps. I'm talking about those sneaky distractors and that whole maze of different accents. Ready? Let's dive in.
All right, first things first. Let's kind of reframe how we even think about this test. It's not just a simple listening exercise. Not at all. It's way more like a game with rules, and more importantly, traps that are specifically designed to catch you out. Which brings us to a big question, one you've probably asked yourself a million times. Is IELTS listening a test, or is it just a trap? I mean, come on, if you've ever picked an answer, felt super confident about it, and then bam, the speaker changes their mind a second later, you already know the answer, don't you? It feels like it's designed to trick you. But here's the good news. Every single trap can be disarmed. Okay, so the main weapon in the test's arsenal is something called a distractor. Honestly, just think of it as bait. The test dangles what looks like the perfect answer right in front of you, and then, at the last second, yanks it away and corrects it. The whole point of this is to figure out who's really listening to the meaning and who's just, hunting for keywords.
And look, if you want to beat the enemy, you've got to know their tactics, right? So let's do just that. We're going to break down the 6 most common types of distractors that I can pretty much guarantee you will run into on exam day.
First up, the classic, self-correction. This is probably the one you'll see the most. The speaker will say something like, "The meeting is at 2 p.m." And if you're in a rush, you'll jot that down. But then you hear that magic little word, "actually," and boom, the real answer comes right after. The key here, and I can't stress this enough, is to always wait for that final corrected piece of info.
Okay, this next one it's really sneaky. It's called the keyword echo. See, the test makers know you've already scanned the multiple choice options. So what do? The speaker will mention a word from one of the wrong answers, let's say Hall B, just to get you to circle it. But what they're actually saying is something like, "Oh, we were going to use Hall B," before telling you the one they actually chose. It's such a classic trap. All right, type 3 is all about causing mental overload. You know what I mean? The speaker will just go off on a total tangent, adding all these background stories or completely useless details. They're just creating noise. The hope is that you get so bogged down trying to process all this extra junk that you completely miss the one simple fact you actually needed.
And this next one reveals a really crucial truth about the test. IELTS isn't just testing your hearing, it's testing your vocabulary. Big time. So if the question paper uses the word help, the audio might use the word assist. You have to be ready for these synonym substitutions. If you're only listening for the exact words from the question, well, that's a failing strategy. You've got to listen for the meaning.
Now here's the interesting part. The test actually gives you massive clues. Words like but, however, not, actually. These need to become your new best friends. Seriously, think of them like giant flashing red lights. They're basically screaming at you, "Hey, a distractor was just mentioned and the real answer is coming up right now." These words are your signal that a change is coming. And our last distractor type. I call it the audio ambush. The test loves to use words that sound almost identical. You know the ones 15 and 50, 30 and 13, or even Hall A and Hall 8. This is where you have to be super precise, especially when you're listening for numbers, dates, and prices, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we've seen the traps. We know what they look like. Now it's time to build your defense system. Because this isn't about luck, it's about having a solid, repeatable strategy that you can use for every single question.
So here it is, your anti-distractor strategy. Number 1, never, ever write down an answer the second you hear a matching keyword. You have to wait for the whole idea to be finished. 2, treat those contrast words, but, however, like alarms. The second you hear one, your brain needs to go, okay, correction coming. 3, for multiple choice, use the process of elimination. Physically cross out the answers you know are wrong. And finally, maybe the most important rule of all, be willing to change your first answer. It's okay to erase.
And this quote really just sums it all up perfectly. In the IELTS listening test, being loyal to your first guess, well, it's expensive. It'll cost you points. Loyalty to the final sentence is what gets you the high score. It's all about being flexible, being patient, and waiting for that final confirmation. Okay, so we have a strategy for distractors, but all of those traps get a whole lot harder when the information comes at you in an accent you're not used to. So that brings us to the second major hurdle we need to clear: navigating the accent maze. Because it's not just what they say, it's how they say it.
Now on the test, you're pretty much guaranteed to hear a mix of accents, mostly British, American, and either Australian or New Zealand. Now listen, your goal is not to sound like them. It's just to recognize their key features. So for British English, listen for that clear T sound, like in water. For American, it's that hard R sound, like in car. And for Aussie or Kiwi English, you'll often hear this rising intonation at the end of a sentence, almost like it's a question. Just knowing these little tells can keep you from getting totally thrown off.
So the big question is, how do you get your ear comfortable with all these different sounds? Simple. You need a training plan. This is how you're going to build up what I like to call accent immunity. Step 1 is actually super easy. It's all about passive exposure. The whole goal here is just to make these accents stop sounding so, well, foreign or weird to your ear. So put on the BBC News for your dose of UK English. For American, listen to NPR or pretty much any TED Talk. And for Australian, just search for an Aussie English podcast. You don't even have to be glued to it. Just have it on in the background. The key is familiarity. That's always the first step. Okay then, when you're ready to get a bit more serious, you move on to active practice. First, there's shadowing. That's where you literally repeat short clips right after you hear them. It's amazing for tuning your ear to the rhythm and the stress patterns. Then there's dictation, writing down exactly what you hear. This forces you to focus on every single word. And finally, the pro move, accent switch drills. You listen to a British clip, then immediately an American one, then an Australian one. This perfectly mimics the exam and trains your brain to switch gears fast. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. We've got the strategies, we've got the training techniques, but none of it really works unless you go into the test with the right mindset. And if you only remember one thing from this entire discussion, please let it be this. Your goal is not to understand every single word they say. That's just way too much pressure. Forget that. Instead, think of yourself as a detective. You are there to listen for clues, to spot the tricks, and to follow the trail to that one final corrected piece of information. It doesn't matter what accent it's delivered in. Your job is to find it. Because when you start practicing these strategies, something really cool happens. The test. It stops feeling like just random, unpredictable chaos. You start to see it coming. You'll anticipate the self-corrections. You'll recognize the keyword traps. Those different accents, they just start to sound like familiar voices. The whole thing starts to feel less like a test and more like a set of patterns. And you know the best thing about patterns? Patterns are beatable.